Muted.
Oh,
Thanks, Autumn.
Oh my gosh, that's hysterical. So everything we just said you didn't hear.
Yeah.
And you told such a funny joke. Okay, we apologize. We had we did. Okay.
What is that? Okay, start again.
We're starting over. Okay, so I'm Kim.
I'm Sam.
Together, we're Kayam. This is Mystic Conversations with Kayam. This is our second episode.
Together.
Mystic Conversations, I think, is maybe like 7 or 8 episodes. Every Tuesday, 1 o'clock, 1 to 3. Please pop on with comments, and we will absolutely do our best to connect with you through the comments and answer any questions. And we were just talking about stuff coming up at the shop.
Workshops.
We have a workshop coming up this weekend on Sunday, 1 to 3 o'clock, called Exploring the Path of Wicca. Introductory workshop, 1 to 3 o'clock, I believe, $25. I'm going really fast because we already said all this, but we were muted. So
yeah,
kind of getting through it. So I think
this is probably nice for some people.
Yeah, that's true. So I think that's what we have coming up we have our fall calendar being released, and oh my gosh, we have so much on the fall calendar. I won't even kind of go through it on this, but it'll be up on the website as well as our Facebook page shortly. All of our events have their own event page on the Facebook page now. So as they're being added, we have a really cool event called Bridging the Rainbow. And this is Sarah Rose is the medium's name. And she connects to humans who have passed, but in particular, she has a gift for connecting with animals. So we'll be doing this event. It's a ticketed event, group event, and a portion of the proceeds will be going to Rough Start New Beginnings Dog Rescue. So that's really good. That's a local dog rescue here in Cranby Township. So if you have questions on that, or you want to talk about tickets, just feel free to reach out, PM, or call the shop, either one. So that's great. And today's topic, pretty heavy topic, actually. The topic is birth and death. So we're going to...
Well, because people make it heavy.
Well, that's true, right?
It doesn't have to be heavy.
It doesn't have to be heavy. No, that's true. It's deep and meaningful.
Correct.
It's powerful.
Yes.
It's all of those things.
Yes.
And it's something that
and important.
Important. And it's something we all have in common. We all going to do it, right? You've done it. I've done it.
We're all going to be born, and we're all going to die.
We're all going to die. So maybe one of the first things we should talk about is the whole, and I think this applies to birth and death, but I think people relate to it more through death. The whole concept of being uncomfortable talking about it. People tend to be a little bit more comfortable talking about birth now with the common interest in things like childbirth education classes, and there's a lot of things that appear in the media that kind of make fun of birth and stuff like that. So people are a little bit more comfortable with that. But I don't think people are very comfortable talking about death. I think that there is it's almost like this taboo that if I talk about it, it's going to happen. Well, it is going to happen. That's for sure.
Whether you
talk about it or not.
Yeah.
And the concepts of the finality of death for people, obviously, and depending on what your belief system is, I think also plays into that. I often wonder for people who don't believe in an afterlife of any kind, how does it feel approaching death? Does it feel different for people who might have a belief in an afterlife?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot about setting it aside, where people, if talked about, we don't need to talk about that right now. We can talk about that later.
Yeah, later, because you'll have all this time because you're young, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter. But as we know, people can die at any time.
At
any time, right?
Good to talk about maybe what they may want or
don't want.
Yeah. Or maybe how they'll come back and talk to you. But anyway.
Well, that's an interesting one. Like when people die, this was something I know that I did with my mother before she died. I knew she was dying. And I said, so when you come back, if you're going to be communicating with me from the other side, let's establish how you're going to do that now. And we'll just tell this story because it's an interesting story. But my mother died a year ago, May. And she said, well, I'll it'll be like a cardinal. And I'm like, oh, for God's sakes, everybody's a cardinal, Mom. Like, you have to come up with something a little bit more interesting. I said, that's fine if it's cardinal, but it's got to be like unusual interaction with a cardinal, like not just a cardinal landed somewhere or I saw a cardinal, right? That if it's going to be a cardinal, it's going to be a big deal. So was it the day after she died that this happened? I think it
I
was.
think it was the day
It
or
was,
two after.
yeah, 1 or 2 days after she died at my home. A cardinal flew into the window and it didn't die as far as I could see.
No, it like came smacked the
The
window
window,
really hard, made
and
a
the-
huge noise, and feathers just flew
all
up,
these
red feathers,
Yeah,
and some got stuck in the screen.
got stuck. So
And
I
then,
got,
well, I saw it happen actually.
Yeah,
Well,
you're
you
like-
were in another
I
room,
was
and
in
I was
another room,
like,
yeah.
oh,
yeah, Sue's
it
here.
happened. Yeah, she made a big bang,
Yeah.
literally. Made
Yeah.
it.
And it
Yeah.
was so immediate after her death too. So that's just, so I think talking about death and talking about
And
signs
you
is
talked
like
about it before with her, so you knew for sure, rather than
Right.
being like, oh, I wonder if that was a sign or
Right.
something. No, you know it was because
Yeah.
she said it would be.
but you have to be comfortable talking about death if you're
Right.
going to do that. And I know even when I was talking about death with my mom, there were other people in our circle that weren't comfortable talking about it. And so she would often kind of get more reserved if they were around. It was almost like she was protecting them from the discomfort of her death that was coming very quick, like
Yeah,
right around the
100%,
corner. But it was like, there were certain people that were pretending that it wasn't coming around the corner, and it was. So I think it was a real eye opener for me on how important it is to give people who are dying a place to talk about their death. So important.
Yeah, I found too, even with my grandfather, who, when he approached his 90s and then his mid 90s and then his later 90s,
Yeah.
he was extremely open and still very well mentally and physically.
Mhm,
But I mean, it was going to come eventually. He was going to die, and he was very open to the discussion of
Mhm.
just talking about death in general. And I brought it up a lot, and he was very happy to. Not happy, but like he was interested in the topic because it was coming up for him.
It was one of the most important things that he was about to do.
Yeah.
Right.
And I remember just thinking like that would be, of course, he felt privileged to make it to that age,
Mhm.
but also it would be interesting to be like, okay, well, the years just keep passing. There's eventually no more time. And I thought that would be
in the physical
a scary
world.
space.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very interesting that way.
Mhm.
I think historically, death was something that people were familiar with. And this is very similar to birth in this way. And so we'll transition over a bit to birth as well. So when people died, let's say in the late 1800s, early 1900s, depending on where you were from. So I'm from Newfoundland, so everything was much more behind there. So what we were still doing in Newfoundland and what was being done here, probably two different things at different times. So, but if someone died, that the dead person, their body was cared for at home, was laid out at home. People visited it at home. Children were familiar with death. They saw dead bodies. They saw, there was not the same institutionalized sanitizing of death. And when the institutionalized sanitation of death, things like embalming and stuff, that really was not part of any part of death at that point. That was a part, I believe, about bringing soldiers home and being able to preserve them when they came home from war or something like that is how embalming happened. But the sanitizing of the ritual of death happened on a physical level through things like embalming, but it also happened on a spiritual and emotional level. Like people's rituals, culture, expressions of grief got removed from death, got sanitized. People are uncomfortable with grief. They're uncomfortable with seeing people cry. They're uncomfortable with seeing people wail. Like there's lots of cultures that are very expressive around grief, and people have a real discomfort with it. And so because that has been removed, now no one is familiar with it. So
and people continue to give it away.
They do, yeah, because they're not aware that there are other options, right? No one is aware that, like, did you know that you can transport your loved one from the hospice, hospital, or your home to whatever place they're being laid to rest? That these are not, there are very few laws that have to be observed. Now, in regards to the disposition of a body, there are laws, but when it comes to birth in particular, I cannot tell you how many times we hear women say, "Oh, am I allowed to do that? I didn't know I was allowed to do that."
Not allowed to do that.
Yeah, I'm not allowed.
Oh, I really wanted to do that, but I wasn't allowed.
Yeah, I wasn't allowed. And so for birth, even more so, there are absolutely no rules. You do not have to give birth in a hospital. I'm not saying you shouldn't, I'm not saying you couldn't choose to or choose not to, but you don't have to. You don't have to have a doctor present at your birth. You don't have to have a midwife present at your birth. You don't have to have your partner present at your birth. You don't have to do anything.
You don't have to be touched
Yeah,
by anyone ever.
You don't have to have a vaginal exam at your birth. Like this is the one that gets me. Oh, well, I went to the hospital, so I had to get checked. You don't have to get checked. There's policies and procedures in all sorts of institutions around how they want to deliver healthcare to a mass of people that in a way that is productive to them, but it's not relevant to you or to an individual, and there's no requirements. So again, the institutionalized, sanitized approach to these very deep, meaningful human rituals has a consequence, I think.
I think it has a consequence immediately upon birth for the person being born, for the family bringing in that person, to start from what should be a rite of passage that is very meaningful and something maybe to look back on, something that has the potential to set the rest of your life for your child and for yourself as a parent, is handed over to someone, the institution, and expected that they're going to care more than you, which is impossible for them. They can't. They don't want to. They have their own lives. So they're going to do their procedures in the way that it's done for a small percentage of people. And for the most part, you're going to be left feeling like something was missing, and you're never going to know what that was. And it was responsibility essentially for your own life, for your child, for the rest of their life. Does that make any sense?
It makes sense to me. I don't know. It makes sense to me. It's like, okay, so the process of birth is, what is it, right? Okay, it's having a baby. It's the creation of your family. And I think about the way that people portray this, on TikTok or in any kind of media. Like, there's just this, there's something missing in the portrayal of what birth is. In reality,
it's like going pregnant. Oh, here's the baby.
Here's the baby, yeah, and I'm going to try to breastfeed, and that is how most people experience it. There's no discussion around the magical power of connecting with your baby prior to birth, to becoming so aware of your physical body and your connection to your baby that you have a intuitive sense of your baby, that you have an ability to communicate with your baby and understand your baby. There is just, women are waiting to be told what to do. Mm-hmm. Tell me what my baby's heart rate is. Tell me what position to give birth in. Tell me what to do. And then, oh, here's your baby. Off you go. Mm-hmm. And we'll tell you nothing now. Yeah. Good luck. Yeah. And that is what I think is the moment of sadness for me. Mm-hmm. It really is this moment of sadness.
There's no follow through from that. Oh, well,
we'll take it all from you.
That? Yeah. I'll give you all this attention until, okay, the baby's out. Yeah. Bye. Yeah.
And the women, they go home. And even if they don't, I feel like most women don't consciously know that they have been disempowered. Like, I think if you had a dialogue with the average woman after birth, they're not aware. But if
they're aware that they're uncomfortable with how things went.
Right. Yeah. They're aware of that. Like how I'm uncomfortable with how, my experience of birth, but, there's nothing I could do about it. Right. There's no remedy to it. And they're not aware that, because it's hard to understand something that you didn't get, right? Mm-hmm. It's hard to understand that. So unless you have another experience where you're like, holy, what just happened there? And I feel like a totally different person, and I'm able to do things that I wasn't able to do the first time. It's hard to have that contrast and understanding. So, one thing I didn't mention, and this is true for both Sam and I was a birth attendant. I've attended hundreds of births. I've been involved in the birth world for a very long time. Sam as well has taken extra education as a childbirth educator and so forth, and a doula. So not just our own personal experiences are we talking about here. We're talking about lots of women, and really culturally, most of the women we see. Mm-hmm. Right. So when I think back to my first birth experience, I was an eager study. I was actually the person who's like, I'm pretty interested in this stuff. I'm kind of excited, and I'm going to read the best book ever, which was What to Expect When You're Expecting. Don't read that book. And I'm going to take prenatal classes, and I'm going to prepare, which I did. And I feel like, I did all of the learning parts that I thought I was supposed to do, but there was a big piece I was missing. And that big piece was the support of other women who had knowledge and belief. So I was kind of winging it, right? Certainly, I couldn't expect my male partner to know anything about birth, and he didn't. Why would he? But because birth has been institutionalized for so long, there's a gap now. My mother wasn't able to give me that, not because she didn't want to, but because she just didn't have it, right? Like she didn't have that reinforcement and encouragement to offer me, and a care for me through because she didn't have it. There's a whole
or
generation.
Even just like a natural, energetic way of being to pass down.
Yeah, to watch.
Yeah,
this is how you do
watch,
it. Yeah. Yeah, like I didn't grow up seeing 6 or 8 or 10 babies be born every year. I didn't.
There isn't even a comfort with women being pregnant now. It's like an illness. Like when people see a super pregnant woman, it's like, oh my God, like, do you need to sit down? Are you going to give birth right now? Like, oh my gosh, like they're a sick person. It's like they're a well woman carrying their baby that's about to be born soon. And it's like people are freaked out of that.
But really, this is one of the most powerful places a woman can be in, right? This is a place of extreme power. So I think that what we're starting to see, well, I'm going to say starting to see, but I mean, this movement of bringing women back into birth as support for women in Canada in particular began many, many years ago. Midwifery was legislated in 1992, I believe it was. And the whole concept was that midwifery legislation in Canada was going to change the scope of birth, that birth would now move to a more women-centered, family-centered, informed choice-centered, natural-centered, all these things, because midwifery was going to have this profound influence. And of course, initially, there weren't enough midwives to service the number of people who need them. Still today, the same thing, but we have way more midwives now. And I think for consumers of midwifery at the time, what they worried about and what I believe has actually happened is midwifery did not change the landscape of birth in Ontario. Birth changed the landscape of midwifery. So we now have midwives providing care in a way that they did not provide pre-legislation. Pre-legislation, it was much more women, family focused. It is an institutionalized approach to healthcare now, as well as any other type of, I would say, doctor-led care. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'd say anything that. Yeah, no, I agree.
You agree. So if you're if you are providing care in a way that your obligations to report or to recommend are directly related to the institution in which you work versus your college, and we see that for sure, that midwives negotiated privileges in a hospital, and that hospital may have a set of rules, recommendations, blah, blah, blah. And in order to keep your privileges, you need to provide care in this way. That way may actually contradict the midwife's scope of practice provided by their own college, but it's irrelevant.
Yeah, I think anyone working within that system, whether it's the doctors, the midwives, or the doulas, are all.
What are they?
Well, they're all. I think it's impossible for it to be women-led, and it's all. You'd think from where they start, good-natured people being like, I'm going to help women, I'm going to help families, I'm going to help them through this very exciting time. But at no point when people are put under a system so strong, it's actually impossible for it to be women-led.
Women-led, right. And
even if someone like has a doula and that they're at the hospital, and it's like, it's still the same thing.
Right. You have the same, because the allegiances, where I hang my hat, my first hat, yeah, I might have several hats and I might want to hang one with the woman and her family, but the first hat I took off gets hung somewhere else. And you have to remember that caregivers have to come from that place. So it brings us to the whole concept of consumerism in childbirth, the sacredness of childbirth, right? And consumerism in childbirth is not a sacred topic. it's actually, it's a real drag that we even have to have the conversation, because it takes away from the magic of birth, right? Like we have to spend all this energy and time fighting for the right to have birth be a woman family focused event. Well, you can't have any joy on the battlefield.
No.
Right? There is no joy on the battlefield. So people who say, well, you know, I want this for my birth. And I would say to them, then why are you going to a setting that doesn't offer it? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Well, I'm just going to say no. No, you're not. Because it can't happen. You cannot give birth on a battlefield. You cannot engage in the higher levels of consciousness, the deep, meaningful ceremonial experiences, power of birth, if you're engaging as a warrior. Right? Those are two very different things. It's like, and we see this in animals, and we are no different. You know, if a deer is in the forest in the middle of labor and they smell danger, their labor stops and they get up and move. Well, as human beings, we do the same thing. So if we are in a setting that there's not 100% safety, if we don't feel that, it impacts our labor. Our labor becomes dysfunctional. That dysfunction leads to intervention. That intervention leads to consequences. And that is the cascade that happens.
And that's like further down the line from what has been essentially institutionalized, as we're talking about. In order to feel that safety for women and their partners and their families, to feel that safety, you really got to go back so far in order to reclaim that.
What do you mean by that? So,
well, I think in order to be like, okay, well, I want my birth to look like this. It's like, where did you get those ideas? Did they come from inside? Are they from you, or was it something that you think is the right thing to do?
Right.
Because you've been told.
Right, because you read a bunch of books, and in those books,
and you're like, oh, that sounds nice. Like, that sounds like that could feel good. That sounds like what I want.
Right.
But how could you possibly know what you want when it's like going to a different planet. Yeah. And being like, okay, well, I'm doing this for the first time. What do you guys do? Oh, you do that? Yeah, I'm going to do that too. Yeah. But you have no instincts, essentially. The instincts were taken away.
Right. And I think if the institutionalized approach to any of these deep, meaningful life passages does anything, removes instinct, right? Automatically. And the impact of instinct on our ability to on the positive outcome associated with birth, I think, is a big deal. So we make the assumption that if we do all these things to make sure everybody's healthy and okay, like if we have continual fetal monitoring, if we induce women at 39 weeks, if we, have...
They're trying to play God, and you can't play God.
Yeah, because... so if we have all these things, then we will ensure